You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Hey everyone, welcome on into the final McGuire Monday of 2024. I'm Julie Stewart-Binks, joined by, of course, Pierre McGuire. And I thought we would do something a little bit different today, Pierre. I was going to message you about this, but I thought, you know what, this guy can do anything that I throw at him on whatever day, on whatever occasion, any question whatsoever. So this is inspired by doing kind of like a review of my own life, or, you know, we do a lot of goal setting at the end of the year. We look ahead. We're always like, what do we need to do to be better? But a lot of the times we don't really do a lot to look back and see maybe what the good things were. What are things we want to bring into the next year? Maybe things that surprised us. I thought we could do sort of a little bit of an audit on the Leafs from 2024 season, just this half, not the one that lost to the Bruins earlier, and then going into 2025. So with that, we know right now the Leafs have just come off of losing to Washington on Saturday. It was kind of, bit of a, not a game that they'll want to like write home about, but let's take a look at the bigger picture here. And I'm sorry, I've just talked this entire time of this starting this, a minute 20. So how are you doing, first and foremost?
Excellent, thank you. And you can talk as much as you want, Julie. I like some of the way you're proposing this whole thing. So you just keep going, kiddo. We're having fun. Keep going.
Thanks. I realized I was doing my own monologuing to begin the podcast. So, all right. What do you think has been a highlight for this Leafs team for 2024?
Starting to develop a defensive conscience. I think they lost that, to your point, on Saturday night a little bit against Washington. You could see huge holes in their end zone coverage. They were not nearly aggressive enough at key times when they needed to get stops. That being said, for most of this part of 2024, I think under Craig Berube and his staff, they've been much better defensively, and that's the kind of hockey you have to play if you're going to be successful in the playoffs. So I think that's been a really important positive part for this team since the new coaching situation has happened.
And to your point on that, with December as just like a month in general for hockey, because of the holidays, because of coming off of also American Thanksgiving, do you think that maybe it's a month that kind of just gets swept under the rug in a lot of ways?
It does for some fans because they've got so much going on, but for the players and the coaches and the management people, this is a really important month. The month of December is important because right after U.S. Thanksgiving, you almost see a big difference in the pace of the game. Games are quicker, they're more refined, and players are more up to speed. Injuries start to happen, so you got to see the depth of your organization. But to me, the biggest part of this time of the year is making sure you're mentally and physically strong enough to get through what is a very convoluted time for players and for fans and for coaches and for management. And then you compound it, if you're a management person and a scouting person, with the World Junior, which is the ultimate dress rehearsal for a lot of NHL players or future players. It becomes a really busy, difficult month.
Yeah, that's very true for scouts, especially, well, the amateur and pro scouts, just everyone's all over the place, all over the entire world. And just on that point of injuries, just to meander a little bit before we go back into our goal setting and audit, is that we talked about injuries, and we know that for the Leafs, one that has popped back up again is Auston Matthews, who has missed 3 of the last 4 games, I believe, or maybe I have the stat. I forget. Let me just get it, because I don't want all of our millions of fans to be like, merp, 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 she got the one thing wrong. Okay, yeah. Toronto has lost 3 of 4 without Auston Matthews in the lineup. Okay, so beforehand, they had won 7 of 9 with him in the lineup. What do you think is different right now with him out?
It changes the slotting for the forward. So for John Tavares, who is probably really well slotted as a 2 or a 3, depending on the night, now he's playing a lot of times as a 1. You don't have the quick strike offensive capability with the tandem of Marner and Matthews because Austin's not there. So that changes a little bit for Mitchell in particular. And we saw Logan Thompson just on Saturday night, just to the question you just asked me, the saves he made on Nylander, on William Nylander.
Oh, gosh.
I wonder, how much the Leafs are even aware. I wonder if the Leafs are even aware that Logan Thompson is a right-handed catcher. In the scouting business, they call that a silly sider. And how great he was. And you look at some of those saves, and I'm just wondering, I'm sure the Leafs had a scouting report on it, but, again, I didn't hear that on the TV coverage. And so, he's a silly sider. And so it just shows you where, if you have a player like Auston Matthews, that can break the game open, maybe make that not even a relevant point. But without him being there, that changes a little bit. Your margins are a lot more refined. They're slighter.
Right. That's definitely true. And we're not really sure exactly when he's going to be back, but apparently, just according to people today on this Monday, December 30th, he's been skating. He's working his way back. He's close, but we're not sure if he'll be playing in the game on Tuesday against the Islanders, of which they are playing the Islanders 3 times in less than 2 weeks, which feels aggressive.
It creates rivalries for sure. Remember back in the day, before you were born, the Islanders and the Leafs used to have a lot of nasty stuff going on, Julie, back in the day. But, for Toronto, your point about the Islanders is really important. They didn't play well the last time. Toronto didn't. The last time they played the Islanders. I think, obviously, a home game, 1 o'clock start, New Year's Eve afternoon. They're going to want to play well. And then it's a quick turnaround. It's a home and home on Thursday. They're down on Long Island to play the Islanders. But what I looked at before we came on together, in the month of January, the Leafs have 13 games. 13 games. Of those 13, 8 of them are in Toronto. This is an opportunity for them to really take another step forward. And so I've got to believe, as a coaching staff, you're always looking at that. And I got to believe that's one of the things. They're hoping Stolars can come back. They're hoping Matthews can come back. They hope they can keep the rest of their roster healthy. And they could really solidify a very strong position in the Eastern Conference if they could have a real good run of home games here in the month of January.
Right. And just to your point, as an asterisk, there is a lot of bad blood between the Islanders and Leafs now, right? Because of JT. Islanders fans cannot let it
There's
go.
There's a little bit.
It's like
they can't. It's such a good point.
Yeah. They can't. They're obsessed.
No.
They're obsessed with John Tavares.
Nobody likes to get left at the altar, right? They love John Tavares when he played on Long Island, and they should. He was a critical component to their team. I remember his draft year like it was yesterday. I really do, and it was Tavares 1, Hedman 2, Duchesne 3. And I remember one of the scouts, who will remain nameless for the New York Islanders, he's no longer working there, said, "We're thinking about taking Duchesne 1. And Tavares will go probably 3," because you knew Tampa was taking Hedman at that time in their development as an organization. So I was like, and I had seen John so much, whether it was Oshawa, whether it was at the World events for Team Canada. He was just so good. And you're like, if they do that, they're making one of the most critical errors of all time. And clearly they didn't make that mistake. And he goes to the Islanders. And what a career he had for those people. And so many great moments when John was there. I wish at some point, just to use your term, I wish they just let it go and respect what he did for them.
Right. Well, I think that they also don't like the fact of how he left, right? Like they thought he was going to stay and then they weren't able to really get anything from him because he left in free agency. But that's classic Long Island, right? Yeah. Like they are a Larry David spite list entire community out there. And I respect people that lean into that identity as much as they do. Okay, so when we get back to the Leafs, and what would you say? So we said a highlight for the Leafs in 2024 was sort of their defensive game, which they had kind of gotten away from in the last game, but overall that has been better. When you look at something maybe that's, what's something that could have gone better in the first half of the season?
I think some of their depth scoring could have been better, but they've been dealing with a lot of injuries. So I think that's something that Brad Treliving really tried to address in the offseason. That's why they signed a player like Max Pacioretty. I think they were hoping they could get more out of him. And I think it's starting to come for Max, which is good because he's missed a lot of hockey. So I think that's a positive. I think they were hoping for more of a set lineup, deeper in the lineup, but they've had these injuries like with David Kampf. And so they're trying to figure their way out with the bottom six. I think the top six is pretty standard. They know where they are. The thing that impresses me, and if they get their lineup 100% healthy, just the size of their left wingers, Julie. The size of their left wingers is massive. Matthew Nyes, Max Pacioretty, Bobby McMahon, Steven Lorentz. I mean, you just look at the left side of their roster. It's so big, and I think that's going to be an important thing when they get into playoff-style hockey as we go forward here. But if you were to ask me what's the one thing that could be better maybe from the first half, is that their depth scoring and their depth lineup would have been more orchestrated. And I think injuries played a big role in that not happening.
And you have to think that they'll be looking at sort of bolstering that, especially you mentioned David Kampf, who's only had 1 goal, 5 points in 24 games this season. And at $2.4 million, that feels like not ideal. However, let's get back to the positives because we do have a negativity bias in life and in hockey. And one thing I'm curious, Pierre, what's maybe a player or something about the Leafs that has surprised you that has come to fruition?
Well, I'm not surprised, but I think fans are. Simon Benoit, how well he's played. When he was in Anaheim and I was working in Ottawa, he was a player that we really looked at as an organization to try to acquire if he ever became available on the market. He's hard. He's in your face. He's an elite penalty killer. He's absolutely fearless. He's never going to break the bank cap-wise, so you're really structured with your money with where he is in the lineup. But he's a kid. You could just see it the other night. You know, he sets up the Tavares deflection goal. You see him on penalty kills. You see him at the end of a period with a big shot block. He's a guy that really cares. So I think he's been a real positive surprise for a lot of Leaf fans. I think he's been a huge surprise in a good way for the Leafs coaching staff. And he's a guy that's really important. So one of the unsung heroes to me has been Simon Benoit.
That's an interesting choice. I thought that you might have gone for like John Tavares or something that might have been more stuck out in the hype of the media, but that's a good sort of underrated pick, I feel, because maybe people might not have even really realized that.
Julie, you know what's interesting? You bring up JT, Johnny Tavares, and I've been so spoiled. I've had so many good seats to watch some of the most amazing things that he's done in hockey. You know, whether it be at the junior level, whether it be internationally in the Super Series in 2007 when he was just a kid playing for Canada, you know, in the 08 World Junior, he was phenomenal. The 09 World Junior, he was off the charts good.
Oh, yeah.
Saved Canada on the New Year's Eve game against the Americans when they were down 3-0. It was JT that stole the show, and obviously he had a hat trick in that game. One of the most amazing things I can remember about John Tavares, this is for fans, nobody was there. Except for the media and a couple of Russian people. It was the summer of 2007. I was with Team Canada. Brent Sutter was coaching. It was 8 games against the best U20 players from Russia and the best U20 players from Canada. It was an amazing series. Canada won 7 of the 8 games. And the other one was a tie, 3-3. So Canada, you know, had a perfect slate, basically. Brent didn't like the practice one day. They were practicing over where the Soviet wings used to play. He didn't like the practice. So the first guy he made skate the gauntlet. And a gauntlet is he had the guys line up from one hash mark all the way down the ice to the other hash mark, a stick length away from the boards. And so he made John Tavares skate up the boards without a puck. He was the first guy to go. And every guy had to hit him. And JT made it to the end of the gauntlet. I don't know how he did it, but he did. And he was the youngest kid on that team. And I saw that happen. I remember going out with Brent, and Pete DeBoer was on that staff too afterwards and saying, I can't believe that kid was able to do that at that age. And they both said to me in different ways, that's going to set the tone for our team. Nobody's even talked about that about John Tavares. He's way tougher than people know. Way tougher.
That's a good point. Yeah, he definitely is. And especially when he has to park himself in front of the net, too. A lot goes into that we don't even really realize. Okay, so one last thing about 2024. What is something that you want to leave in 2024, not bring into 2025? It could be an idea. It could be a style of play. It could be anything about the Leafs and their culture.
Injuries. I want to leave the injuries behind. I want these guys to get a set roster, play with their set roster right to the playoffs, play a 4-line attack-oriented type game with their defensive structure so that when they get into the playoffs, They're going to be rested, they're going to be ready, and they're going to know what the challenge is. Berube's been to the final. He understands what it takes. Mike Van Ryan's been to the final. He understands what it takes. Lane Lambert has been a hockey man. He's a lifer. He knows what it takes. Their staff is good. It's hard. It's smart, but they need their players to be healthy. So I want to leave all the injuries behind in 2024 and come into 2025 with a healthy team right to the end.
Right. We would love to see what that would look like and how that all gels together, because I'm sure it would be just them firing on all cylinders. Incredible. So the biggest goal for the Leafs has to be, and any team in the NHL really who's in a position like they are, to win the Stanley Cup. Would you say that's right? Okay.
100%. Every team starts with that at the start of the year.
Right. Yeah. And then if you're the Rangers and you decide to just like blow everything up, then your goals are a little bit different. Okay. So with the Leafs,
when the season started this year, I can say this to you as your friend and coworker. When the season started this year, the New York Rangers weren't planning on blowing their team up or starting a rebuild. They were planning on winning the Cup. Either. There's no way they were thinking anything else. There's no way.
Yeah, I didn't get that vibe either from the beginning of the season. But as we know, things can change very rapidly depending on who is making different decisions. Okay, so if your goal is to win the Stanley Cup, let's just say 2025, number one goal, win the Stanley Cup. What are 3 things you think the Leafs have to do, maybe every day or every game, to be able to get to that point?
Maintain stability in goal. Make sure the players understand their roles going into the second part of the year. We're almost at the halfway point now. Make sure the players understand their roles. They should, but make sure they understand. So that's 2 of the 3. And then the third one I would say is maintain their health. I really think that's a critical thing for this Leaf team. Any injury to Auston Matthews or any injury to John Tavares or any injury to William Nylander or Mitchell Marner, that changes the schematic of their team significantly because it takes away the identity that they have of being this offensive juggernaut. And I think it's one of the reasons why they're right at the top of the food chain in their division and even in the Eastern Conference. They're a legitimate team to compete for the Stanley Cup. They really are, Julie. I've been telling you this from the start of the year. I'm not going to change, but if they're not healthy with their better players, it's obviously not going to come to fruition.
Right. So then in saying that, if injuries are such a big part of whether or not this team is successful, does the front office really need to look at figuring out other options before the trade deadline?
I think they have to monitor what's going on with their farm team, obviously in Toronto in the American Hockey League. I watched their American League team play a lot. I saw them, have some success with Belleville this weekend, which is really important for them. That's a big rival. And obviously David Bell, who coaches Belleville, has done a fantastic job with their group there because they've had so many kids called up to Ottawa. But those were tight games. Toronto found a way to win them, which is really important. It says a lot about where their group is right now. But I would say they have to monitor what's going on there. And then if they like some guys and maybe give them a little more of a taste up high, up with the big team. If not, then you got to go out and acquire it. And that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. Again, we're all watching the World Junior. So we're watching Easton Cowan. We're watching Fraser Minton play in the American Hockey League. And what Fraser's finding out is it's a little different playing in the American League than it is in the NHL. It's a different game. It's not nearly as structured or layered, and so it's not as predictable. And it's a harder game for younger guys to play. It really is.
Oh, really? And in what way? Just because it's, as you mentioned, just the unpredictability of it?
It's unpredictable. Guys come from all over. They're not nearly as refined as NHL players, so the pass may be a little bit off, or the tempo of the skating might not be as good as what you're used to. Or it might be even more physical because the ground and pound game in the American Hockey League is really apparent. So it's maybe a little bit less civilized, but I think the American Hockey League is the second best league in the world. I really do. I watch a ton of it. I was proud to work in it when I was in Ottawa or when I was in Pittsburgh, which was back in the old days, or when I was in Hartford where our team was in Springfield. So I spent a lot of time around. I worked for 6 months with our American League team when I was in Ottawa, down in Prince Edward Island many, many moons ago. I'm a huge fan of that league, and it's a hugely important league. And I think the Toronto Maple Leafs know that for their development.
Okay, so with that development, I got to ask you about Matt Murray because he played in his second NHL game in like over 600 days on Saturday. And we know that this is sort of just like the Flex Seal guy in before Stolarz gets back, and that Wool is maybe a Stolarz and Wool kind of situation going forward. But how much can you even read into a game and how they do when you're also going up against Logan Thompson, who was incredible, as you mentioned. But when your goalie that's his second game in 600 days, like how can you even rank how you did?
So what you do in that situation, at least how I've been taught to do it, is you monitor the battle level, how he's reading the play, how he's reacting to what he reads on the ice. What's his rebound control like? Is he late to plays? He's capable of fight through the battles, the down low scrums and the screening that happens at the NHL level with a lot of regularity. So you're looking for a lot of different things, but the number one thing is the battle level and the ability to read the play. He may not always make the stops, but if it looks like he's in position, he's making the right reads, there's something there. I got to tell you, I worked with Matt when I was in Ottawa with him. I was in the room with the former general manager there and DJ Smith when we sent him to the American Hockey League after a game in Anaheim. He was not happy about it, which you don't want any player to be happy, but he took his medicine. He went down. He worked his tail off with Justin Peters, who's now the Ottawa Senators goalie coach, and he eventually found his way back into the NHL, and he did a real good job for that team the second half of the year. I'm a big Matt Murray fan. I like him very much as a person. I think he's got still some serious upside as a player. I just don't know if he's going to stick around Toronto if they get everybody healthy. I just don't know where that goes.
Right. I think that's a great point that you make, that it takes a lot of character for a guy to go from winning a Stanley Cup to going to the American Hockey League. Yeah. And that can be a real character hit. But if you can show that you can do it and you work and you get back to it, that's a huge upside. But again, your play on the ice is something that is obviously the biggest thing with that. Okay, let's get back to just this Leafs really team.
Cool. You know what's cool about that though? Sorry, Julie, just to interrupt you for one second. I apologize for that. Just a point that's Toronto-centric. Kyle Clifford won Stanley Cups in LA. He plays for the Toronto Marlies in the American Hockey League. I remember having breakfast in Toronto maybe 2 years ago, and he had just been sent down. You should have seen his behavior. It was phenomenal. Leadership, he had young guys with him, teaching them about the National Hockey League, teaching them about being a pro. That's what it's all about. Logan Shaw is playing for Canada right now over at the Spengler Cup. He's a Toronto Marley. I had him in Belleville. I can't say enough good things about what a great pro he is, what a great person. And that's why I think a lot of these young guys develop when they get mentors like that. And I think that's really important, really, really important.
Right. That's a good point. And, you do kind of forget some of these guys that have, of course, Kyle Clifford won the Stanley Cup, was part of that game-winning goal against the Rangers when he was with LA. And you're sort of like, where did they go now? They're like, oh, they're with the Marlies, and they're now having an impact on sort of the next generation as well, as still being able to play at a very high level, as you mentioned, with the AHL. So love hearing stories like that about guys that are doing so much more than what they're doing on the ice. But when we get back on the ice with the Leafs, you mentioned some things that haven't been going so well so far, just necessarily in the back end defensively. I saw William Nylander discuss that they've had some lapses, and JT said, we've got to be better in different areas right now, end of the season. Vibe check. How would you rank where the Leafs are right now? What are maybe like one or two things that really need to be cleaned up?
One of the first things I like is when you bring up William Nylander saying that or John Tavares saying that, it shows that they've set the standard really high. And I love that. I think that's really important internally. The players have to police the room and they have to police one another. It makes it a lot easier for the coaching staff, and it also tells the players, we're serious about this. And so when your top players are starting to police the room, I think that's really important when guys challenge one another. So that's a good thing. But if you were to ask me, I think, again, the health, it's got to be really important. And they have to tighten up defensively. I didn't like their game defensively against Washington the other night. I just thought they were way too loose in their in zone coverage. sometimes teams, especially at this time of the year, as you spoke about it when we started this podcast, it's a tough time of the year, and I think they just lost their focus a little bit. It'd be interesting to see if they get it back for the Islanders game. I have to think they will in the game tomorrow. That's a really important game for the Islanders to try to build some momentum for them. But it's also a critically important game for Toronto in terms of getting their feet set to go into a January, like which what I said, 13 games, 8 of them on home ice. Really important for them to structure and stabilize home ice going into the month of January.
Right. And you got to think that they'll have something that they want to prove after losing that last game against the Islanders at home. They know that they're a better team than them. I'm sure that that's what they believe in the room. And to your point with the guys keeping each other accountable and policing themselves, I noticed with covering the PWHL yesterday, Ottawa's coach Carla McLeod had said that they really, when things aren't going well, they don't want people to be quiet, right? It's like about communication. Holding each other accountable, talking in the room, because it's so easy to just, and even in relationships or in any part of life, just not talk about the thing that is the elephant in the room. But you have to be open and honest about it. I'm sure you know that so well.
I'm so glad you brought up Carla McLeod's name. She's one of the smartest players I've ever seen on the men's side or the women's side. She was a great defenseman for Canada, did a lot of Olympics that she played in, a lot of world championships that she played in. She was really fantastic. And there's a young lady that went and learned her craft as a coach over in Japan. I mean, when you think about it, it's a pretty amazing thing. And, you know, I'm a big fan of the way Carla appreciates and sees a game. I had some really nice talks with her over the years. And then on the other side, you had Greg Fargo. So you were dealing with some coaching high power coaching there yesterday when you were working the game in the PWHL.
Yeah, they were great. I mean, talking with them, and especially as you mentioned, Greg Fargo coached at Colgate for so many years, and then also he'd coached against Sarah Fillier, who's like the number 1 overall pick from Princeton, who plays for New York now, but he had coached against her last year. But I found Carla funny. She said, I've heard every question in the book, so like give me something weird when you're out there, like anything. And you know what that's like, right? Just trying to shake it up with the coaches when you're interviewing them, because they know what you've got to ask them. But I love that she said, just give me something, anything different.
She's pretty confident in her abilities, and she should be. Again, I can't stress enough, she was such a cerebral player. She was so smart on the ice and not overly large, as you know, and she was able to, you know, just stop people because she was so darn smart on the ice. Really, really gifted. Mm-hmm.
Right. And everyone listening in our Toronto market, the Toronto Scepters have gone through a bit of a tough spot right now with the beginning of the season. However, they are fantastic players. The game is incredibly fast. It's so physical. I highly recommend everyone to go out and check out a game. You will be floored. I mean, I was thinking this, Pierre, just as a meandering aside. I play hockey. I played hockey since I was 12. I was a figure skater as well. But I don't even think I could hold a candle to like one shift out there with some of these women. Like their level is getting better like every single game. I'm so impressed with how they play.
So I watch a lot of the games. I'm really impressed too. The physicality, as you talked about, is unbelievable. The tempo of the game is really good. I have the privilege every summer of working with a lot of different players, whether it's men or women. And the women's game, especially at the collegiate level, you talked about Sarah Fillier going to Princeton, and watched her play a ton there. And, you know, I coach a lot of the women that play in the Boston area in the summer times. And I can't believe where the game is now compared to where it was 20 years ago. The growth of their game has blown right by the guys' game in terms of the overall development of players. It's been phenomenal to watch. It really has been.
Love to hear that, Pierre McGuire. You heard it here first from the one and only. It's blown past the men's game. But we are an equal opportunity podcast here, and we are very happy to talk about all things Toronto and hockey. And Pierre, this has been great. A lovely audit on 2024 and a look ahead to 2025 and what the Leafs can do to potentially, maybe, perhaps, we think they can win the Stanley Cup.
They're going to compete for it, Julie, for sure. They definitely will.
Well, they have to. There's no other way. All right. Thanks so much. We'll see you guys in 2025.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.